When my husband stood at our son's graduation dinner and declared he was leaving me for someone else, the entire room fell silent. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just smiled and said, "How brave of you to say that out loud." What he didn't know was that his new life was already crumbling because I'd been preparing for this moment for months. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who thought they were smarter than you, stay with me, hit like, subscribe, and let me tell you how I turned humiliation into poetic justice. My name is Elena Marquez, and for 26 years, I played the role of the perfect wife, the dependable one, the homemaker, the woman who clapped the loudest at her husband's promotions and silenced her own dreams with a smile. My husband, Adrian, was a corporate lawyer, charismatic, composed, the kind of man who could make a lie sound like a vow. Together, we raised one son, Leo, who just graduated with honors in biomedical engineering, my proudest achievement in life. Our family dinner that evening was held at the St. James Country Club, a place Adrian had chosen for its exclusivity. 40 guests, silver cutlery, a champagne tower, and a room full of our mutual friends, most of whom were his colleagues. I'd helped plan every detail, and yet it was all part of a script I hadn't read. When dessert was being served, Adrian stood up, tapping his glass for attention. I expected a toast to our son. Instead, I watched my husband of nearly 3 decades casually destroy the life we'd built. "I've decided to start a new chapter," he said, glass raised. "Elena and I have grown apart. This marriage, it's time we both move on." The world stopped. Gasps rippled, silverware froze midair. Leo's smile faltered into shock, and behind Adrian, near the back of the room, sat Harper Lawson, a woman half his age, a marketing executive from his firm. I had suspected for months. Adrian's voice carried easily. "This isn't about anger or betrayal," he continued. "It's about honesty and freedom." I let him finish. Then I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood. "Congratulations," I said softly, "on your honesty." The entire room turned toward me. I smiled, a slow, practiced expression that had survived PTA meetings, board dinners, and every small condescension of my marriage. Then I reached into my purse and placed a small navy envelope in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "Something for later," I replied. And then, to my son, whose face was pale and trembling, I said, "This day is still about you. I'm so proud of you, Leo." With that, I left. Outside, the Florida evening air hit my skin like a baptism, heavy, warm, and liberating. Behind me, I heard the door swing open, and Adrian's voice calling, "Elena, wait." But I didn't. I had been waiting long enough. You see, betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, quiet erosion, one missed call at a time, one late night at the office, one changed password. 3 months ago, I noticed small transfers from our joint account. $1,200 here, $3,000 there, marked as client hospitality. But Adrian hadn't hosted a client dinner in years. So I did what any woman who spent her life being underestimated would do. I started documenting. Every transaction, every late-night charge, every whisper of deceit. And what I discovered made my stomach turn. Adrian had been siphoning funds not just from our accounts, but from his firm's client trust. He'd been buying designer jewelry, paying for plane tickets, and even signing the down payment on a Miami condo, all under Harper's name. The same Harper who now sat pretending to sip her champagne while my world burned in front of her. But the best part? Adrian had forgotten the prenup he signed 26 years ago. A prenup that I had insisted on, back when I was the one with money, a small inheritance from my late father, the same inheritance that funded Adrian's first business venture. That agreement contained one very important clause. In the event of infidelity, the injured party shall retain full rights to marital property and shared assets. He'd laughed at it then, called it old-fashioned. Now, it would ruin him. That envelope I'd placed in front of him at dinner contained 2 things. A copy of our divorce petition, filed that very morning. Evidence of his financial misconduct neatly documented and ready for court. While he was busy rehearsing his little freedom speech, I had been securing every account, freezing assets, and transferring my shares to a trust under my maiden name. When I walked out of that restaurant, I didn't feel broken. I felt clean. He thought he was leaving me for a younger woman. He didn't know he'd already lost everything, starting with his reputation. The drive home from the restaurant felt like watching the closing credits of a movie I didn't audition for. The Florida sun was sliding beneath the horizon, the air thick with that sticky mix of salt and asphalt that always clings to early summer. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, a storm gathered. Grief, fury, humiliation, all orbiting around one thought. He really did it. He actually stood up there and did it. When I reached our house, a white stucco colonial on Harbor View Drive, the lights were on, and the dining table still set from the small celebration we'd planned for after dinner. The smell of champagne and rosemary chicken hung in the air like ghosts of a life that no longer existed. I sat down in the dark, breathing in the silence. Like something inside me had clicked into place. 3 months earlier, I'd stumbled on the first clue, an odd receipt from a jewelry store in Naples, a gold bracelet engraved with initials I didn't recognize. Not mine, not Leo's, Harper's. I remembered sitting on our bed that night, the paper shaking in my hands. I could have confronted him then. I could have thrown the receipt in his smug face and demanded answers. But instead, I folded it neatly and slid it into a folder labeled Project Sunrise. Because that's what this was now, a sunrise, an ending dressed as a beginning. The days following his announcement were a study in performance. The world loves a scandal, especially in small, moneyed circles like ours. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Friends, colleagues, even Adrian's sister, all wanting to know what had really happened. I answered no one. Silence became my weapon. Meanwhile, Adrian's version of the story spread like wildfire. I was unstable, vindictive, going through menopause, and acting out. The usual cliches men throw like grenades when a woman stops playing soft. The sympathy rolled in. For him. Of course it did. He was charming, articulate, and suddenly single. Harper played the part of the reluctant other woman, full of guilt and Instagram quotes about following your heart. But what they didn't know was that Adrian was unraveling quietly behind the scenes. 2 days after the dinner, his firm called a private meeting. The managing partners had received an anonymous package, copies of financial documents showing client trust misappropriation. The email had come from an encrypted address with no signature. Inside, every transaction was labeled, time-stamped, color-coded. I knew because I sent it. By that afternoon, he'd been suspended pending an internal investigation. By the next morning, his firm's board had voted to terminate his partnership. He called me that night, voice tight and brittle. "Elena, what the hell did you do?" I sipped my wine, watching lightning crawl across the horizon. "You're gonna have to be more specific. You sent them the documents. You ruined me." "No, Adrian," I said quietly. "You did that all by yourself?" I just turned on the lights. A pause. Then, the classic pivot. "I loved you once, Elena. We could still—" "Don't," I said. "Don't rewrite history just because it's inconvenient." He hung up without another word. But the emotional toll wasn't nothing. There were nights I'd wake up gasping, my chest tight, images flashing, his hand on another woman's back, his voice saying my name like a sentence. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was existential. For decades, I had built my identity around being dependable, supportive, safe, and in one public announcement, he'd reduced me to collateral damage. Leo called me every day from his apartment across town, worry stitched into every word. "Mom, everyone at the party's talking about it. Dad's saying you blindsided him." I smiled softly into the phone. Good. Let him think that. He was quiet for a moment. "You don't sound angry." "Oh, I'm angry," I said. "I've just learned how to aim it." The gossip only intensified. By week 2, Harper's face was plastered across local society blogs as The woman who stole a husband. She and Adrian tried to spin it, posting smiling photos, captions about new beginnings, but online comments were vicious. Anonymous accounts dragged them with surgical precision, leaking subtle truths only someone close would know. I didn't have to lift a finger. I'd set the dominoes in motion already. You see, the second phase of my plan wasn't legal, it was social. I started with whispers, a few quiet conversations with journalists I knew from charity boards, a small hint about ethical irregularities at Adrian's firm, a suggestion that perhaps Harper had been aware. Nothing overt, just seeds. Within days, the whisper turned into a headline. Law partner under investigation for financial misconduct. Subheading, sources close to the firm suggest an inappropriate relationship between the accused and a junior marketing executive. I read it over coffee the next morning, then folded the newspaper neatly beside my plate. But revenge isn't linear. It doesn't heal you instantly. There were cracks, lonely, sharp moments between victories. One night, about a week after the story broke, I found myself standing in the walk-in closet that used to hold his suits. The faint scent of his cologne still lingered on the empty hangers. For a second, the fury softened. I remembered our early days, the laughter, the ambition, the shared belief that love was a partnership. And then I remembered the jewelry receipt, the smug announcement, the way Harper smirked when I left the restaurant. The softness vanished. When his firm terminated him officially, he tried to play the victim again. They had no proof, he told mutual friends. It's a misunderstanding. But the IRS investigation that followed was proof enough. The same accountant who used to handle our taxes turned over years of discrepancies I'd quietly documented. Meanwhile, the prenup kicked into legal motion. My attorney, a sharp woman named Renee Patel, filed an emergency order freezing all joint accounts. Within 48 hours, I had control of our house, the vehicles, and the savings accounts. Adrian was left with one personal checking account, the same one he'd used to pay for Harper's lavish tastes. It was nearly empty. One afternoon, I stopped by the house to pick up a few documents. He was there, packing boxes. His hair was disheveled, his eyes rimmed red. The once flawless man now looked like a shadow of himself. "Elena," he said quietly, "we don't have to do this. I've made mistakes, but you're being cruel." I met his gaze evenly. "Cruelty is what you did at that restaurant. What I'm doing is justice." He swallowed. "Harper's left me," he muttered. "She said she can't handle the stress. I'm sure she'll find another man's wallet to hold," I said, grabbing my files. "You should be proud. She learned from the best." Outside, I paused on the porch, looking back through the doorway at the man I'd once built a life around. He sat on the floor surrounded by his own undone arrogance. Boxes, papers, the hollow sound of defeat. For a fleeting moment, pity brushed against me like a passing breeze. Then I remembered how it felt when he said, "We've grown apart," in front of our son and 50 strangers. No, he deserved every ounce of what was coming next. By the end of the month, I had filed for the full divorce under the infidelity clause. His assets were frozen, his firm reputation gone, his mistress moved on, and the legal clock was ticking. The court hearing was set for mid-July, his 55th birthday. And I'd already chosen the perfect outfit for the occasion, a navy suit, crisp white shirt, and the diamond earrings he'd once given me for being his anchor. I planned to wear them while I watched him sink. He'd wanted freedom. I was about to give it to him. Stripped, documented, and court certified. The best part, he'd sign it himself. The day of the hearing dawned with that strange calm that comes right before a thunderstorm. I remember standing in front of my mirror that morning, fastening those diamond earrings, the ones Adrian had given me years ago, after his first big win. Back then, they'd meant pride, love, partnership. Now, they were trophies of irony. I tied my hair back, smoothed the navy suit jacket across my shoulders, and looked at the woman staring back at me. No trace of the quiet, accommodating wife remained. This was someone new, someone deliberate, someone dangerous if provoked. When I arrived at the courthouse, the marble hallways echoed with the muted shuffle of suits and heels. Adrian was already there alone, this time, without Harper or his high-priced lawyer friends. He looked older, tired. His once polished charm had curdled into desperation. His lawyer, a balding man with sweat beading on his temple, nodded politely to mine Renee Patel, poised and calm as ever. Renee leaned toward me and whispered, "He's going to try to settle privately. Don't flinch." I didn't plan to. When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. "Case 2714, Marquez versus Marquez," the clerk called out. Renee stood first. "Your Honor, we are seeking enforcement of a prenuptial agreement, Section 4B, pertaining to infidelity and asset retention." Adrian's lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we'd like to motion for a private settlement." The judge raised a hand. "Denied. We're proceeding on record." And there it was, a faint flicker of panic across Adrian's face. He wasn't just losing money to no. She was fighting for the judge and for the word, and know how it. He was losing the story he'd spun to everyone who would listen. Renee laid out the evidence with surgical precision. Copies of financial transfers, jewelry receipts, hotel invoices, dates aligned perfectly with his business trips. She spoke with measured clarity, letting the silence between sentences stretch long enough for humiliation to fill the room. "Your Honor, as you can see on page 12, the respondent used marital funds to purchase gifts for a third party, Miss Harper Lawson. The transactions total $48,762 over 6 months." The judge's eyebrows arched slightly. Adrian shifted uncomfortably. His lawyer tried to object, irrelevant to the dissolution itself, but Renee was ready. "Relevance, Your Honor, lies in the contractual clause, infidelity forfeits equitable distribution." The judge nodded slowly. "Continue." I sat quietly, watching him unravel. His hands fidgeted with the cuff of his shirt, the same nervous tic I'd once found endearing. Now it looked pathetic. Then Renee handed the judge another folder, the one labeled Exhibit F. Inside were copies of the anonymous financial records I'd sent to his firm, proof of his misuse of client trust accounts. Renee spoke calmly. "While this court is not responsible for criminal proceedings, it is important to note that the respondent's professional misconduct directly affected the family's financial stability." Adrian's lawyer went pale. The judge sighed. "This evidence is substantial. Are there any criminal charges pending?" Renee smiled faintly. "There are investigations in progress." That was when Adrian's composure broke. He leaned toward me, voice low but trembling with rage. "You're destroying me." I looked straight ahead. "You did that when you underestimated me." By noon, the ruling was finalized. The judge's voice was steady, almost gentle, but every word was a hammer. "In accordance with the marital agreement and given the evidence presented, all joint assets, including real estate and savings accounts, are awarded to the petitioner, Mrs. Marquez. The respondent is ordered to vacate the primary residence within 30 days. I didn't smile. Not yet. But inside, something loosened. A pressure I'd carried for years suddenly gone. As the gavel came down, Adrian's lawyer whispered frantically to him. He didn't move. Just stared at the table, his jaw clenched so hard I could see a pulse in his neck. After court, I walked down the marble steps into the blinding sunlight. Reporters were already waiting, local outlets hungry for a story about the fallen golden couple. I didn't speak. Renee had already handled the statement. Mrs. Marquez wishes to focus on her family and privacy. But as I reached my car, a voice stopped me. "Wait." I turned. It was Harper. She looked wrecked. No makeup, oversized sunglasses, trembling hands clutching her phone like a lifeline. Elena, she began, her voice thin. I didn't know about the money. I swear, I didn't. I tilted my head. You didn't know the married man you were sleeping with was buying you jewelry and condos out of his firm's funds? Her lips quivered. He said it was his. I thought you left him years ago. I smiled, not cruelly, but with a kind of exhausted honesty. You believed the version of the story that suited you. We all do that at some point. She blinked, and I could see her tears threatening. He's been calling me nonstop. He's lost everything. Good, I said softly. Now maybe he'll learn what freedom actually costs. And then I walked away. That night, I poured myself a glass of red wine and stood on the balcony of my now silent house. The city lights shimmered on the bay, reflected across the glassy water like fragments of old memories. I thought of all the years I spent shrinking myself, hosting, compromising, making peace where none was deserved. I thought of the nights I stayed up waiting for headlights that came home too late. And then I thought of my son. Leo had texted me earlier that day. Proud of you, Mom. I learned more about strength from you this month than in my entire life. That message hit deeper than any court victory. It was proof that what I'd lost, the illusion of love, was nothing compared to what I'd regained, respect. But there was one last move left. Quiet, subtle, poetic. 2 weeks later, I made a donation to the Women's Legal Support Foundation, a nonprofit that helps women escape financial abuse and manipulation. The amount? $48,762. The exact total Adrian had spent on his affair. I didn't leave my name. The donation read only, in honor of lessons learned. By then, Adrian's world was ash. His law license was suspended. The firm's investigation had turned over his records to federal authorities. Rumor had it he'd moved into a modest apartment near Clearwater, trying to freelance legal consulting to pay his mounting debts. And Harper? She disappeared from social media entirely, last spotted working retail somewhere in Miami. For the first time in decades, peace didn't feel foreign. It felt earned. A month after the ruling, I received a single letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. Elena, I'm sorry. Not for what I did. I don't think I even understand why I did it anymore. But for what I became. You were always stronger than I was. I see that now. I hope someday, when you think of me, it's not with hatred. Adrian. I folded it carefully, slid it into a drawer, and locked it away. Some things deserve to be remembered, not forgiven. That night, I stood in my kitchen, barefoot on the cool tile, and whispered to the quiet air, I don't hate you, Adrian, but I don't owe you anything, either. I poured another glass of wine. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, soft, low, almost approving. His empire had fallen. His mistress was gone. His reputation erased. But my revenge wasn't just about destruction. It was about resurrection. Because now, it was my turn to live. The weeks following the hearing unfolded with an eerie quiet. For years, I'd been used to chaos, calendars packed with his meetings, late-night phone calls, dinner parties that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow up close. Now, my days had space. My nights had silence. At first, that silence terrified me. It wasn't peace yet. It was absence. The absence of noise, of roles, of pretending. I'd catch myself reaching across the bed to his empty side, half expecting the warmth that used to be there. Then I'd remember who he really was, and my hand would curl into a fist. But slowly, something shifted. The quiet began to feel like oxygen. I started waking up early again, before the sun rose. I'd stand barefoot on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the orange light spill across the bay. For years, I'd woken up next to a man I didn't trust. Now, I woke up next to my own choices. One morning, I opened a new notebook and wrote at the top, "What does freedom actually look like for me?" The list that followed wasn't glamorous. It wasn't yachts or revenge vacations. It was things like sleep without waiting for headlights, dinner without checking a phone that never rings, a home that stays quiet because peace lives here now. 2 months later, the house on Harbor View didn't feel haunted anymore. I repainted the kitchen a soft terracotta. I replaced the heavy masculine furniture with lighter pieces that actually made sense for me. I even tore down Adrian's home office and turned it into a small library. There was something symbolic about that, transforming the place where he hid secrets into a space where truth could live openly. On one shelf sat a small silver frame with a single photo, me and Leo, at his graduation. He was smiling, so was I. For the first time, the photo didn't remind me of betrayal. It reminded me of survival. But peace, I learned, isn't a straight line. Every now and then, a memory would slice through. The sound of his voice saying freedom. The way people looked at me that night in the restaurant, pity wrapped in curiosity. It used to sting. Now it just informed me. Because the thing about humiliation is, once you've been burned by it and lived, it loses its power. You stop fearing it, and that's when you become unstoppable. Then came the call I didn't expect. It was a Friday afternoon. Renee, my lawyer, was on the line. Her tone was matter of fact, but I heard the undercurrent of satisfaction. "Elena," she said, "you'll want to hear this. The investigation into Adrian's firm just concluded. They've issued formal disbarment." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Disbarment. For a lawyer, that's a death sentence. No appeals, no second chances. "Thank you," I said finally. Renee hesitated. "He'll try to contact you again. Don't respond." "I won't." I hung up and let the words sink in. The man who'd spent years building his life on power and pretense now had nothing to stand on. And me, the woman he dismissed as fragile, dependent, I was the one still standing. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the Florida Bar Association, a courtesy copy of the ruling. Attached to it was a small sticky note from Renee. "Justice doesn't erase pain, but it clears the path ahead." I tucked the letter into my drawer, the same one where I'd locked away his apology. The contrast between them felt poetic. One was regret, the other, accountability. As summer gave way to fall, I decided to do something I hadn't done in decades, travel for myself. Not for a conference, not for a family photo op, not for anyone's approval. I booked a 2-week trip to Barcelona, the city where my mother was born. The place I'd always said I'd visit someday. It was a solo trip, and it terrified me. But standing under the bright Catalan sun, surrounded by the hum of life and the scent of sea salt and espresso, I realized something profound. I wasn't lonely, I was alone. And those two things are not the same. I visited art galleries, took cooking classes, even sat by the Mediterranean just to listen to the waves. Every breath, every heartbeat felt like a reclamation. One night at a small restaurant tucked between narrow stone streets, I struck up a conversation with the man sitting next to me, Daniel, a travel photographer, with a laugh that came from somewhere honest. He didn't know my story. I didn't offer it. We talked about books, cities, and how endings can sometimes feel like beginnings. He asked if I was traveling for work. I smiled. "No," I said. "I'm traveling for peace." He grinned, lifted his glass. "To peace, then," we toasted. Nothing romantic. Nothing forced. Just two people in the same moment, recognizing the beauty of existing without need. When I flew home 2 weeks later, I didn't come back to the same woman who'd left. I came back with lightness, with proof that I could build joy from the rubble. I resumed consulting part-time for an architectural firm, my old passion, resurrected. Leo started graduate school at MIT, and every weekend I'd walk by the bay, barefoot in the sand, breathing in the salt air that used to remind me of confinement, but now smelled like freedom. Then, one last piece of the past drifted through. A final letter, certified mail. It was from Adrian's attorney. Mr. Marquez wishes to formally relinquish his rights to the Harborview property. Enclosed, please find signed documents transferring full ownership. I flipped through the pages, stopping at the signature. His handwriting had changed. Smaller, shakier, stripped of ego. There was no note this time. Just the paperwork. Clean. Final. I signed, sent it to Renee, and watched as the pen left the last mark on our short story. For the first time, it truly felt over. That night, I hosted a small dinner. Just me, Leo, and a few close friends. We laughed. We ate homemade paella. There were no staged photos, no guests checking their reflections in silver spoons. Just real people. Real warmth. When Leo hugged me goodbye, he whispered, "You're not just my mom anymore. You're my hero." I held him a little longer than usual. "Heroes don't always wear capes," I said. "Sometimes they just stop apologizing." Later that night, I poured a final glass of wine, stepped out onto the balcony, and let the breeze wrap around me. The city lights shimmered below, the same as they had that night months ago, but everything had changed. I wasn't the woman he betrayed anymore. I wasn't the victim of a public humiliation. I was the author of my own ending, and the beginning that followed. People always ask what revenge feels like. They expect fire, chaos, explosions, screaming. But real revenge, it's quiet. It's the sound of peace returning to your chest. It's walking past the mirror and recognizing yourself again. It's no longer needing them to regret what they did, because you've already outgrown the version of you they betrayed. Adrian lost everything. I found myself. And between those two outcomes, there was never any contest. If you've ever been betrayed, remember this. You don't need to destroy someone to win. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be. If this story moved you, hit like, share it, and subscribe for more stories where the truth always comes full circle.